Welcome, everybody watching, everybody out there. This is a new edition of People Over Politics, and we have a brand new special guest, a Prince Georgian, nonetheless, from gorgeous Prince George's. And thank you for joining us, Congressman Brown.
Hey, it's great to be on, Martin, and maybe I'd say it's about time, right? I know I've been
Absolutely,
busy.
we're happy to have you. We're happy to have you.
It's great to be on.
And so there's of course a lot of people in Maryland, and some people on a national level, who know you. But give them your elevator pitch. Who are you, and why are you here?
Sure. First of all, Anthony Brown. I don't come from privilege, but I've got the privilege to represent Maryland's 4th congressional district. 3 terms now in Congress. Before that, Maryland's lieutenant governor, and before that, in the House of Delegates. I've practiced law for now over nearly 30 years, and I'm looking to be Maryland's next attorney general, so I can make a bigger impact in the profession that I've chosen, which is public service. So whether I've been working on public safety, public education, the environment, public health, I have an opportunity now to do it by leading 700 professionals in the Office of the Attorney General, all committed and dedicated to the well-being of Maryland and its residents.
And so, I try to make this digestible for people, for layman's person, for people who aren't familiar with the Attorney General's office of Maryland. What are some of the roles and functions of the office?
I mean, it's a vast office. It's a broad. It's one, you could consider it in many ways the largest public interest law firm in the state of Maryland. 450 plus lawyers, 250 paralegals, counselors, investigators. And the responsibilities range everything from organized crime, right, investigating and prosecuting, to environmental protection. The Office of the Attorney General reviews every major state procurement, every contract before the RFP or the request for proposal is issued, and before the contract is executed. The office reviews every regulation that is promulgated by any state agency to make sure that it complies with the laws of the state of Maryland. So again, there's contract law, there's labor and employment law. So really what the office needs is an attorney, but also someone with leadership experience, because that's what the Attorney General does. He or she leads 700 professionals in representing the state, but most importantly, working for the people.
Absolutely. And, I know that, something that's near and dear to my heart is, of course, renters and homeowners who are facing, eviction and rent hikes. So what is something, that could be done from the Attorney General's office, to help address, this ongoing, because a lot of times I know that, businesses are suffering as well, but it feels like in some ways businesses are taking advantage of, the consumers.
Sure. And so that brings up the Consumer Protection Division in the Office of the Attorney General. It's one of the largest divisions. It handles everything from elder abuse law to fraudulent and deceptive trade practices by any business, whether platform-based or retail, bricks and mortar. And also it has a unit that handles landlord-tenant disputes. And when I say handle, it provides a mediation service as well as an education and outreach component, keeping tenants informed of what their rights and responsibilities are in a landlord-tenant relationship, and certainly connecting them to resources when they find that they may be facing eviction. But I think that the Attorney General's role has to go beyond that. You've got to be an advocate. And how you're an advocate, I believe, is in the changes that are necessary in the law in Maryland. So what do I mean by that? For example, I support legislation that was proposed this year in Annapolis. It wasn't successful. That we call just cause evictions. A renter should not be evicted for any reason. There should be just cause by a landlord to be able to evict or terminate a lease. And when you think about renters, whether you own a home or rent a home, this is the place that, you find sanctuary. It's a place you raise your family. It's your space. And I think that we need to afford more protections to our renters. On Capitol Hill, I worked really hard during this pandemic to get resources for rental assistance for those who are having difficulty making rental payments during the pandemic. And what I would also advocate for as Attorney General with the General Assembly is that if someone is being evicted for failure to pay, before that eviction can go through, there has to be every effort demonstrated that we have assisted that renter in connecting to and receiving whatever public resources are available to help them stay in the home. Why do I say that? Because we saw during the pandemic, there were renters who were facing evictions once the eviction moratorium ended, but there was all this unused rental assistance money at the county level and the state level. And what I would say is, look, as a landlord, you should be working to keep renters in your home. So before you can evict, you've got to demonstrate that efforts have been made to connect your renter to resources that might not be available. And the Office of the Attorney General can play an important role in facilitating that effort should that become law in Maryland. Absolutely.
And I know that, evictions have been a big issue. I know the moratorium is up now. So evictions, they can go forward, even though the courts are very backed up. It's going to take some time to adjudicate itself. But one of the things that I've seen is, not just evictions, but rent hikes and increases. Is there anything that you could do or advocate from, as you mentioned, that's a great word, advocate from the Attorney General's office to persuade the state to, take up anti-rent gouging measures across the state?
Sure. So, and as you know, we don't have rent control in Maryland. I think there may be one municipality in Maryland that has rent control. But what I've been advocating for, and I'm glad you raised the issue about price gouging. Maryland is one of a few states that does not have an anti-price gouging statute on the books. Now, during the pandemic, with the executive order that Governor Hogan had issued, it did include the authority for the Attorney General to go after those who engage in price gouging. I think we need to have a permanent authority for the Attorney General on the books in Maryland as we're looking at price gouging, not just at the pumps, and we're seeing that now today, perhaps more than anything else, but also in the grocery stores and also in services, which could include landlord tenant or rental services. Look, rents do go up. But when you see spikes in rent, I think if they raise concerns about whether or not a landlord is taking advantage of either a single renter or a community of renters, I think it's worth the Attorney General having the authority to investigate. Not every investigation is going to uncover or reach the conclusion that there's wrongdoing. But I think without that oversight, without a watchdog, without someone like the Attorney General able to look into those matters, then I think renters are at risk of what we're talking about, which are unreasonable spikes in rent that may not be justified by, granted, we're in an inflationary period now, prices are going up and you are going to see upward pressure on rents. But when you see spikes where rents are dramatically exceeding, the rent increases dramatically exceeding what we're seeing otherwise in inflation, I think the Attorney General should have the authority to look into that. So you got to be an advocate first in the General Assembly to get that law passed. And I'm the only candidate running for Attorney General who's got that kind of experience working with the legislature in bringing about the kind of changes and reforms in our laws that will truly protect more Marylanders.
And the reason, I bring up that question is because, I'm a new council member in the city of Laurel, of course, one of the districts in District 4, one of the cities in District 4. But, there's been a rent increase issue, especially at some of the developments. I'm not sure if you saw the Washington Post article a few months ago about the Laurel 24 property and, the seniors who were going to be evicted. And we were able to work out a deal between the city with the ARPA funds from, the federal government. So I'm sure you were familiar with that story. But, just doing more and more research about it, there's other people, throughout Laurel, some of which are at these properties that are as early as yesterday facing a 60% increase, if they want to renew their lease. So some of them are looking at upwards of $1,000. And I think that I forget who recommended it, but they were like, you might have to reach out to the attorney general, because
whatever legislation is drafted, it has to be done in a way that can cover rental situations. I don't want anyone viewing this to believe that the attorney general is going to have like sole discretion as to whether, determining whether something is rent gouging or price gouging. You have to incorporate in statute the criteria that, if met, meets the threshold of price gouging, right? I'll work with the legislature to address those issues. Because at the end of the day, there has to be legislation. Now that's separate and apart from fraudulent and deceptive practices. I mean, if someone's in a rental agreement and you can find that they were, defrauded, or there was deceptive practices either to get them into the rental arrangement, then certainly the attorney general today has authority to look into that. You usually don't see fraudulent and deceptive practices around leases, but we're talking about price gouging, renters, rental gouging. We are going to need to go to the General Assembly to get authority to do that.
Sure. And it's good to know that, if successful, we have an advocate.
Right, because listen, even without the authority, and this is what I said, as the Attorney General, I'm going to protect Marylanders, and I'm going to use every authority I have. And if I don't have the authority, I'm going to go to the General Assembly, a place that I'm familiar with, to get the authority. And short of that, I'm going to use the bully pulpit of the office. And if we've got, commercial landlords, particularly commercial landlords, who are, jacking up our rents, then I'm going to use the bully pulpit, the microphone of the megaphone, the bullhorn, if you will, of the office to call out what I think is unfair treatment of Marylanders.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear that. And to talk about the advocacy. I think I recall seeing you along with several others testifying on a bill in Annapolis. Of course, many bills in which you testify, but specifically related to cannabis reform. I know I was a fan. The reason I put this is because I didn't see a lot of the same people testify on Jill Carter's bill or Gabriel Acevedo's bill, which I would argue was far more equitable. In the legislative will, in the way it was written.
Yeah, I was in Annapolis testifying in support of lawful adult use of cannabis, we now know it's going to referendum. The voters of Maryland will have an opportunity to vote on that in November. I am certain that it's going to pass. And for me, there are a few components that really need to be in place, and we can learn lessons from when Maryland adopted medical marijuana. And that is, number one, we have to have equity in terms of those who participate in the business of cannabis. Whether you're a grower, processor, or a dispensary, we need to see more Black and brown people having business interests. It's going to generate jobs. It's going to generate wealth. It's going to generate revenues to the state. And in the medical marijuana context, we really don't see the kind of diversity in ownership, which I think, given our history as a state and a nation, how the war on drugs, the failed war on cannabis, has so negatively impacted Black and brown communities. I think, look, if folks are going to benefit from the business, then it also should be Black and brown business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs. Number one. Number two, and I call it like the 3 E's: equity, expungement. We should have automatic expungements for any Marylander, either present or past.
Jill's bill went as far as the vacation of stays. So of course, expungement, is an extra process, and vacation of stays, from my understanding, looks better from a legal perspective.
Yeah, and I can support that, but I'm also talking about the automatic expungement, where someone doesn't have to go in and make the request, because so many good things that we do in government are really unknown to someone, to people, to constituents, and then you're in front of a job interview and you never learned that, wow, you could have had your record expunged had you made application. So I think, you know, and also, again, as Attorney General, very proactively needing to inform Marylanders of these, you know, new opportunities, these new rights, these new privileges. So expungements are key. And the final component, and we did this when we expanded gaming in Maryland, is to make sure that we have sort of empowerment funds where the revenues, some of the revenues that come to the state because of lawful adult the sale of cannabis, that we're creating funds that are investing in those communities who have been hardest impacted, hardest hit by the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs and cannabis. We did that in the context of expanded gaming in Maryland. We should do it when we're talking about lawful adult use and the revenues that that's going to generate for the state. So those are kind of my 3 E's around lawful adult use of cannabis.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad to hear. And of course, I remember you're an advocate and supportive of responsible adult use. When we talk about equity, one of the key things that I always ask people is like, let's define equity. What does equity look like, right? Because what I've seen like at the legislative level is like equity, diversity, inclusion are all buzzwords that sound good, but like on paper, you know, when it's implemented, is it actually equity? So like, what would equity look like in Maryland? Have
Sure.
we ever thought to define that?
Yeah, well, like let's say, for example, in the context of minority business enterprises, which is in the procurement program in Maryland, we have equity goals, right? We have diversity goals, and I know the number has moved up. When I was lieutenant governor, I think it was 28% of Maryland state contracting needs to go to women and minority-owned businesses, and you could measure that. There were some industries where perhaps meeting that goal was a little bit more difficult because of the availability of women and minority-owned businesses. But for the most part, Maryland was doing a pretty good job, certainly under the previous administration, in moving towards that goal. So what we're talking about when it comes to cannabis, we're talking about in licensing. So not only we're and licensing really is like an ownership interest, a property interest in a license, and that's a little bit more trickier, a little more difficult. But we should also have goals in our licensing regime as well. And as a turn, and in order to do that, you do have to have a legislative factual finding that there is disparity in an industry. And I know right now there's a study underway in Maryland. As Attorney General, I'll review that study. And I'm going to offer a legal opinion on that study. And given that my values are such that support greater diversity in licensing, we're going to look to the law and with an eye towards an interpretation of the law that supports that goal. Equity in licensing when it comes to cannabis, both growers, processors, and dispensaries.
And so, you know, just staying on the topic of diversity in the industry, you know, in the medical industry, there's about 102 licenses out, about 99 medical dispensaries, about 5 or 6 cultivation that is operating, and about a handful of processors. And, you know, with those 99 dispensaries operating, maybe a handful of people of color. Of course, it gets greater going to woman-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, but, you know, still a minority. Then you go to cultivators. None of them are Black cultivators, you know, Black or brown cultivators. And then we go to processors. I think there's 1 or 2. So the thought is like the recreational market. One of the things that you know, I'm nervous of is making sure that the multi-state operators that are already dominating the medical market and that, you know, are maxing out with the 4 dispensaries that you can have, you know, are going to be the first to get preference. When I look at, you know, places that have done things right, or at least I believe have done things right, like New Jersey, I remember that when seeing over their list of applicants that got accepted, and like it's the final round, over half of them were minority applicants, you know, so that was like, I was like, wow, that actually looks like diversity, equity could be accomplished. You know, right. And then also they were offering conditional licenses. When you were going to get the cultivation, you didn't need to have real estate, you know, in the first phase of the process. They had low fees, you know, just like getting the LLC. So, you know, those were real pathways, you know, to entry, you know, in my perspective, in my viewpoint. But just looking at it also from a criminal legal perspective, I think that there are reparative things we can go further on, right? And so one of the things that I think, or it's actually two. It was one point in the bill, and I had a conversation with Delegate Clippinger, was if you have a past charge of marijuana, cannabis possession, with the bill that they accompanied with the referendum, it could be, adjudicated. But that is if cannabis is the only charge, so I don't think that should be the case. And I think that a lot of people fearmonger, but what about murder and cannabis possession? Well, of course, those are two of the worst things that you could mention. And the other perspective was it was a very low threshold on possession. So I think a lot of people would still be, criminalized or penalized financially. Some of the people which are burdened financially in the first place. So I know that was long-winded.
Look, there are a lot of issues that are yet to be worked out, and particularly that low threshold of quantity is a real issue because, imagine a scenario and remind me what the quantity it is. I think it's is it 5 grams or something like that?
I know right now it's still, I think 14. Right now it's either 10, 14. And then I think that the bill allows up to 1 or 1.5 or something.
So let's say it's 1, just for example. And so 1 gram, I'm allowed up to 1 gram. So let's say, for example, I've got, 0.1 grams left, and and it's in my car. I'm not consuming it. I haven't consumed it. It just happens to be in my car. I go to the dispensary, I buy 1 gram. I now have 1.1 grams. I can get pulled over and arrested. It makes no sense whatsoever. So we've got to work through that. And part of that is increasing the threshold. Part of it could be as simple as saying, look, if you can have proof of purchase from a lawful dispensary, okay, and over a period of time, then you're covered. You're good. So look, these are all solvable issues and problems. These are obstacles that we can sort of move out of the way to make sure that this is fair and equitable, and it can be implemented. So as the legal issues arise, as the chief legal officer of the state, my responsibility is to be actively involved in the conversation, looking at the laws, the legal framework, and identifying where we have problems, work with the legislature to overcome those problems, interpret the law as it is. And again, you have to interpret the law the way it is, but we all know that our values shape our interpretations. And my values, my priorities is that, there's equity in not only the ownership side that we're talking about, but in how we treat people who are taking advantage of or benefiting, I should say, from the law.
Sure. And just from a federal perspective, I didn't look at the vote tally.
A lot of work has to happen at the federal level. I'm telling you, we got a problem there.
Well, I was going to say I didn't look at the vote tally, but I'm sure you're one of the people to vote in support of the MORE Act.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We've got to take cannabis off the schedule. We also have in that, things like expungement and some of the things that they're looking at the state level. So absolutely, I've supported it at the federal level. And quite frankly, there are a number of Republicans that support it as well.
And well, I guess it's 2 things. One, we need more senators who support it, or it's going to go nowhere. Because of my understanding, it's the second time that the MORE Act had passed and we celebrated. But of course, it still hasn't been the will of the Senate to pass this bill. The second thing was what were we talking about? We were talking about the federal level and legalization. Oh, my question was, how many years do you think from now we're looking at legalization from the federal level? And for me, I had a conversation with somebody that I think maybe we should focus on descheduling more than legalizing, because if we descheduled it, I'm sure it would be considered just like any other prescription pill, or
maybe it may be treated more like alcohol.
Sure.
I offered an amendment on the Defense Authorization Act just 2 days ago, Wednesday. We had our long committee voting session. I offered an amendment, and some Republicans supported it, where we are asking the military Reform Review Panel to look at the disparities in sentencing when it comes to cannabis versus, let's say, drunk on duty. If you're drunk on duty, the maximum penalty is a bad conduct discharge and up to 2 years in prison. Nobody gets that. Okay, they might get the bad conduct discharge, but for possession of small amount of marijuana, it's a dishonorable discharge and up to 5 years in prison. So you got disparities there. So we've got to be looking at the way that we are treating people when it comes to the cannabis, and there's a lot of changes that have to happen in federal law. And I've supported them along the way. And now, but I think your question was, when do I think we're going to get to that threshold number of 60 senators?
Yes.
Let me tell you, that filibuster is blocking a whole lot of good stuff. George Floyd, Justice and Policing, filibuster is blocking that. The John Lewis Voter Rights Advancement Act, stuck in the mud. The Build Back Better. Actually, that was stuck in the mud because of Joe Manchin, because we could have gotten that on a simple 50 Democratic vote. That had a lot of good provisions in there, healthcare, human services, environmental protection, and justice, et cetera. But look, I don't know when the Senate's going to get rid of the filibuster, but I do think that communities have to exert pressure. Elected officials need to talk about it. We need to be out there demanding it. But I don't know when that's going to happen.
I agree. And by that time, you might be long gone, right?
I won't be long gone for public service, because I'll be your attorney general and using that pulpit, that platform to advocate for the elimination of the filibuster.
Yes. You'll be long gone from Congress, but advocating from a different space. Let me make that clear. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you was, we're coming short on time, but at the federal level, I think that there should still be a lot done for hate crimes, right? So as Attorney General, is there something that you could do as hate crimes, or how will you ensure the protections of Black and brown people of color in the state of Maryland?
So we just passed the No Hate Act. It did make it out of Congress for President Biden's signature. More resources to the Department of Justice to support state and local governments that want to sort of ramp up their hate crimes enforcement infrastructure, expanding hotlines, training for law enforcement to really identify hate crimes, to make sure they're documenting them appropriately. So when you're later down the road trying to prosecute, you can do it on the foundation of a good police report, because so many prosecutions just start with a solid police report about an incident. Expanding hotlines, I think I mentioned that. In Maryland, there are a number of things as Attorney General. Number one is I'm going to go after that Department of Justice money to expand our hotline, to expand our hate crimes task force, to be inclusive to an even broader community. But also, I'm going to seek independent authority to bring hate crime actions in Maryland. Right now, hate crimes, they're typically brought with a companion offense: assault, vandalism, murder, things like that. The Attorney General's office, where we focus a lot on narcotics trafficking, drug trafficking, labor trafficking, you don't see as many hate crimes affiliated with those offenses. So you don't see the Attorney General bringing many hate crimes. So I'm going to seek independent authority to bring those cases independently, certainly for the high profile hate crimes. So we're sending a clear message to Maryland that racially motivated crimes and often it's not just race, it's ethnicity, it's also faith. We see a lot of crimes motivated by anti-Semitism. No place in Maryland. So I think there is an important role. You remember 3 years ago, it could have been more now, I think 4 years ago, sadly enough, Richard Collins, Bowie State University student, commissioned into ROTC and was killed, murdered by a College Park at College Park. So we had to amend Maryland's hate crime statute because it didn't stick against that man. So we've done some work in Maryland to improve our laws. I want to expand the authority of the Attorney General to bring those actions.
Awesome. And of course, you bring up Richard, and as I was saying, I was in his graduating class, so I remember at the graduation at Bowie State, they put like his cap in the chair. So I don't know if you remember that, but definitely that was a very tragic moment for the state, and I'm glad we've done some work since then to rework the law.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Segueing, making sure we get you out of here. I got 3 quick questions for you. So, are you a Pepsi or Coke type of guy?
Pepsi, it's a little bit sweeter.
Pepsi. Okay. Hey, I think you're one of few people. Most people say Coke. I've gotten a lot of Diet Cokes as well. But yeah, Pepsi. The next
I actually
question
like
is
Dr. Pepper. I do like Dr. Pepper. Nice
Dr.
thing
Pepper.
about Dr. Pepper, it's the only drink, a carbonated soda that I've met or had where the diet version tastes almost identical to the regular version.
Huh. Okay.
Just
Well,
so you know.
and if you had to recommend a book to someone new in politics, what would that be?
Probably Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy.
Great choice. Great choice. My last question is, who's your favorite superhero and why?
My favorite superhero growing up was Iron Man. And like any superhero, because they got superpowers and they do great things and they save the world. And it's a power that's usually unique to them. Yeah, but my true superhero though, unlike most superheroes who seem to live forever, is my dad, who passed away at age 89 in 2014. And he's been my hero, my idol, my mentor, for my entire life, and still inspires me when I think about him every day.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure your father does as well. And so I want to get you out of here. Just tell people how they can stay connected with you. We have an
Good.
election.
AnthonyBrown.com. Go to my website, Facebook, AnthonyBrown.Maryland, and Twitter. It's Brown4, the number 4, Brown4MD.
Okay, awesome. And like I said, guys, we have an election coming up. I'm supportive of Anthony for Attorney General, Congressman Brown, and so definitely check him out and look forward to voting on July 19th. Appreciate
Or
you. Thank
earlier.
you.
Early voting starts July 7th, and you can vote by mail right now. All right.
Yes, or earlier, or earlier. Let me not forget that, or earlier, guys. All right, I'll see you soon. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman.
All right, take care.
Appreciate it. Okay, that was this week's episode of People Over Politics. We had a brand new guest, and we'll have a brand new guest next week. So see you next time.